that I know I'm talking about inclusion to a crowd, to a room, that actually is all around inclusion. So I just want to acknowledge, particularly around this wonderful spectrum of sexuality and gender, that I know that there's probably people in the room who know loads more than me, and I'll accept that. And I also feel actually really pleased I'm going after V, because there's so much in there that I wish I was able to say. I want to acknowledge as well that there's loads of people in this room that are on your own personal journeys of deconstructing socialisation and childhood trauma and attachment patterns and all of that. We know that that's really difficult, sticky, yucky work. It's slow and it's practice. So I want to acknowledge that as well. I just want to pause and feel, and I guess because of all of that work, the energy in this room, the love in this room, the safety in this room. I just noticed bits of you that are feeling safe. And maybe the little bits of you that are just tucking away, but are not quite ready to come out yet. And those are the bits. That's what inclusion is about. It's about building safety. It's about building belonging. I'm going to tell you a story, very briefly. It's a story of my family. And it starts when my son was born, my son Joe, a little while ago. And like most parents, we were really keen to show him to his grandparents. And so we were all ready. His grandparents live in Ireland, so we were ready to do this journey. And the day before we set off on the journey, his granddad contacted us and said that his mum was welcome and Joe was welcome, but I wasn't welcome. And it's because of this, because of the colour of the skin. And that's what we did. So the two of them went, and that's what we did for a while. So eventually we put our foot down and we said, this isn't right, and it will be all three of us or it will be none of us. And so I was finally invited over. And on that first journey, we were driving across Ireland, and it was really slow. We kept stopping, and I was getting really frustrated. And so I finally asked, why are we taking so long? And the answer was, if we arrive in the daylight, then we're sleeping in a caravan half an hour away from the beach. And if we arrive in the evening, we can sleep in the spare room. How are you feeling that? And actually I'm really curious to see just notice what's happening with you as well. And maybe there's a bit of anger there, a bit of confusion. Maybe there's a bit of shutdown, a bit of freeze. But when we arrived and we slept in the spare room, because we got there in the evening, I was told, actually I was never told this directly, this all came through my partner from Joe's granddad and then relayed to me. And I was told when I was there that I wasn't allowed to the local village because they might see me. I wasn't allowed in the garden because the neighbours might see me. And if someone came to the door, postman, neighbour, I had to go to the bedroom and hide, stay quiet. Yeah. And actually, that's not quite the worst of it. But I'm going to pause here and I think the question I really want to ask now is, what happened to Joe's granddad that made him need to act in that way? And clearly he knew it was wrong because he wouldn't tell me directly. So he was ashamed of telling me directly. He knew there was something wrong, but he's still driven to do that. And the answer is so multi-layered, but the surface layer is really simple. He was worried that his community would outcast him. He was worried that he wouldn't belong in his community. So he needed to take all that fear and push it out onto me. And it's kind of simple, and that's one of the ways that's how it works. So I said that's not the worst bit. The worst bit is, actually that I went along with it. And I'm so much more angry now than I was then. And I went along with it. And I guess it's the same question. What happened to me to make me go along with all of that? And it's the same. I needed that sense of safety, to feel safe in that place. My nervous system couldn't kick into fight and it couldn't, because I'd be ejected, couldn't kick into flight, I couldn't leave. So it went down, dropped into form, into pleasing, into keeping the peace. And that's one of the things about racism and oppression. So often we think about racism as all those interpersonal acts, the aggression, the violence, the abuse, or we sometimes think about it as all the institutional acts, the passing us by for promotion, or the numbers of black people who are so quickly diagnosed with mental health issues or arrested or excluded from police, from schools. And the thing we often forget about racism and oppression is the internalisation of it, the way it shapes our behaviour from childhood, the way it shapes our responses, it kind of shapes our DNA expressions. It's there and it's ingrained, that internal racism. And when it becomes so ingrained and so stuck in there, it actually begins to be named as personality. This is how that person is. And when that trauma is stuck there and it becomes part of our personality, we begin to spread it. Trauma is contagious. We spread it to our friends, to our families. And so our families begin to take on that characteristic. And when our families are acting from trauma responses, we then spread it to people around us, to our wider community. And it spreads across the generations as well, from our grandparents to us and to our grandchildren. And so when a wider community starts acting from that trauma response, it gets named culture. This is how that community is. And so when that culture just happens to be the dominant culture, the culture of the mainstream, the culture where people are in power and privilege, the only way to recognise those trauma responses are when we clash, when we fall out of that privilege and we're clashing with the culture. So when we're in our own power, when we're in our privilege, and we're not clashing against culture, how do we know what is the authentic me and what is my socialisation? I'm going to try and answer that question in a moment. I'm just going to, I'm going to remind you as well of something that happened a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if any of you remember the Casey report, which was about the Metropolitan Police. It came out and it said, 2 weeks ago, Metropolitan Police was racist, misogynist and homophobic right to the core. And I guess that's not really surprising for most of us. But what is surprising is that the Metropolitan Police actually has an incredibly good anti-racist strategy. It's following all good practice. It does all the stuff around community policing, talking to communities, paying people from different communities to work out how should we be policing with you. It does recruitment drives to increase the diversity of the police force. It does really good support of anyone who complains, supports them, takes them through that system. And so it's really good practice, except there is one thing missing in it. And when you read through that anti-racist strategy, it mentions black, the word black, 344 times. And it mentions the word white 33 times. And if you're white in the police force, you get some black history, you get some training around the history of policing black communities, and you're told the impact of racism. And there seems to be this assumption that if you're white and you're told the information, that your behaviour will change. All we need is to be told what's wrong, and our behaviour changes. But if you've been doing that work on unpicking your own socialisation, if you've been looking at how we keep ourselves small, how even with internalised oppression, we don't even need another person to keep us small, we do it for ourselves. You know how hard this work is, how incredibly difficult, and how we can't stop. We're constantly learning and growing and practicing and making mistakes and then going back and practicing. So I guess that's my invitation to this community. And it is an invitation I've been needing to make for, I guess, probably 6 months after I joined this community, which hasn't been that long. And the invitation, let me get this right, it's one that I pinched from the women's movement, from women to men, and it was quite simple. Allyship is really important, but the most important thing is to do the work. And so my invitation is to join me in doing the work. Let's start talking about how do we unpick white nervous system trauma. Across this community there are groups, there's lots of men's groups, and talking about men's work is commonplace. So let's make talking about white people's work commonplace. I've got a really good point I want to end on, which is kind of only a little bit relevant. I really love it, so I'm going to end on it. And I just need to check that I haven't missed anything really essential. Actually, the only thing I have missed, I'm going to say it because I really like it, is that this thing, the illusion of inclusion, the whole point of this talk, is exactly what was happening in the Metropolitan Police. There is all this energy and time and effort put into this small percentage of the workforce, and the hope is that this small percentage will change the culture of the majority. And it's really like a bad relationship. It's the time when we're with someone because we're really hoping that they're going to change us and make us a better person. Or even worse, it's the other way, when we're with someone and we really see the potential in them and we want to change them. We know we can change them. Actually what we mean is we want to make them just like us. That's the illusion of inclusion. It's not about inviting everyone to my party, because that means it's still my party, it's my music, it's my food. It is inviting people to create a party. Bring your food, bring your music, let's see what we create. And that way I hear lovely new music. That way I eat loads of delicious food, and I learn more about myself. I'm going to say this last point has nothing to do with most of this talk. I discovered this fact a couple of weeks ago, I love it. And it's all this stuff that I'm talking about, is nervous system stuff. It's the amygdala, it's that animal body, animal brain. And we as human beings, we share 99% of our DNA with chimpanzees and bonobos. And when chimpanzees have a power dynamic, when there's something that they need to resolve, they resolve it through aggression and violence and war. And when bonobos have a power dispute and they need to resolve it, they resolve it through sexual activity, through connection, through love. And we have that equal animal potential to go either way. So my final message is, let's be a little bit more bonobo.